2025 was the year Harley Davidson quietly hoped riders wouldn't look too closely at. Shipments slipped, dealers filled with unsold 23 and 24 models, and the new 2025 lineup dropped with higher prices that didn't match what riders actually wanted. The slowdown spread, fast trade-ins froze, showrooms went quiet, and longtime Harley owners chose to keep the bikes they trusted rather than gamble on something new. This was a real shift you could feel in every dealership across the country. Stick with me to the end, because the reasons behind this year are deeper than anyone expected. The numbers. Harley couldn't cover up. The first cracks showed early in the year when shipment counts slipped harder than anyone inside the company wanted to admit. Dealers who normally waited weeks for stock suddenly had rows of untouched machines, and the quarterly comparisons told the same story. Year over year, the brand fell behind where it stood during the previous cycle, and every month added more pressure to an already strained system. Revenue reports revealed a softer pattern than expected, the kind that makes even seasoned analysts lean forward and reread the fine print. Rising production costs pushed margins down further, tightening a vice that had already been creeping inward for 2 straight seasons. On the showroom floor, riders noticed the difference immediately. A shop that once felt alive with movement now carried a strange stillness, the kind of quiet that tells you more than any press release ever will. The shine was still there. The badges still carried weight, but the energy had slipped. A few owners admitted to counting how many dust lines settled on fenders during slow days, a small detail that said more than any internal memo. For riders walking in, the atmosphere felt unfamiliar. You could take your time, circle a bike twice, talk about saddle height or fairing lines, and no one rushed to close a deal. That might sound pleasant, but seasoned riders know that when a dealership grows too quiet, the storm has already passed through. Despite all the branding strength, the numbers were slipping, the pressure was rising, and the truth was laid bare in every still corner of the floor. But the downturn did not start in the factory. It started in the wallets of the riders themselves. Why riders pulled back their wallets. By the start of the year, a different reality shaped the buying season. Financing tightened across the board, with lenders pulling back on easy approvals. Riders who once traded up confidently every few years found interest rates climbing just high enough to make their next decision hesitate. Inflation wore on everyday budgets, from tools and food to fuel and insurance, and hobby money became the first place many riders cut back. Older owners, who usually formed the backbone of big touring sales, chose to ride what they already had instead of reaching for something new, a well-kept touring machine could easily run past 100,000 miles, and for many longtime riders, that fact mattered more than the promise of anything fresh in the 25 lineup. The pride of keeping an older machine running strong outweighed the urge to sign on for a higher note. Riders talked about waiting out the market, watching for deals, or holding on to reliability they already trusted. Dealerships watched veteran riders browse, chat, and leave without buying. It was not rebellion, just practical tightening. When budgets shrink, big purchases slide down the list, and the brand felt it everywhere. Riders still loved the road, but their willingness to spend dropped sharply, while the company's strategy failed to adjust. And while wallets tightened, a much deeper problem began stacking up in back rooms and show floors across the country. Before we move on, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps keep these breakdowns coming, especially when prices shift without warning. And if you've already spotted a boat worth watching, let the community know what caught your eye. The mountain of 23 and 24. Models dealers couldn't move. The leftover models became the weight no dealership could ignore. During the prior production cycle, the brand expected demand to swell, and output followed that optimism. But when the buying season slowed instead of surging, dealers were left with far more 23s and 24s than they could realistically move. Rows of unsold tours sat under showroom lights, some for half a year or more, and the backlog became impossible to hide. Demand had been misread, plain and simple. Riders noticed the surplus immediately, because riders always notice. Word spread that certain dealerships were privately offering quieter discounts just to clear space. Sales staff found themselves whispering about incentives, trade-in values, or creative financing options that only appeared after a long conversation. The public price tag stayed the same, but behind the scenes, the pressure to move old inventory grew heavier by the week. Leftover models at lower prices pushed riders to wait, creating a widespread pause. Few wanted a 25 when a nearly identical 24 sat cheaper nearby. Dealers were stuck between brand loyalty and overcrowded floors. The market shifted toward hunting last year's deals, turning the 25 launch into a stalled start. And just when it seemed the situation might stabilize, the new pricing structure added a final layer of strain. The 25 price trap that backfired. When the prices for the 25 models appeared, many riders felt the sting immediately. The base numbers rose, adding another hurdle at a moment when the market could least absorb it. Riders walked into dealerships expecting something bold, something meaningfully upgraded, only to find a price increase without a matching leap in value. That slip in perceived worth created an instant disconnect. Dealer add-on fees remained firm as ever. Freight, setup, documentation, and titling created totals that climbed far beyond what riders expected from a model year that offered few new features. Expensive paint schemes pushed some bikes into luxury territory, and while the colors looked sharp, most riders saw them as a premium that did not improve the ride itself. The 25 lineup delivered solid machines, but nothing so new that it justified the sharper price. Riders no value, and the raised prices clashed with floors full of leftover models. Comparing a 25 to a discounted 24 made the decision easy. The issue was not the machines, but the math. Momentum faded, and the year slumped under mismatched pricing and unmet expectations. And that strain inside the showrooms was only the beginning of the deeper fractures that would soon appear behind closed doors. Cracks in the boardroom strategy. The first signs of trouble inside the company did not come from a leak or a headline. They came from a shift in tone between the people expected to steer the brand through a difficult year. As the early figures from 2025 slipped lower than forecasted, disagreements began to crack through the usual unified front. Some leaders wanted to push harder into premium touring, believing the loyalty of longtime riders would support higher margins. Others insisted the brand needed to tighten costs and redirect resources toward more dependable production planning. The split grew sharper each week as the financial pressure increased. Stakeholders watching from the outside demanded clarity. But clarity was the one thing the boardroom could not give. Every meeting brought new projections, new strategies, and new arguments about which direction would keep the company stable. Some believed the lineup should be trimmed to focus on the strongest sellers, while others argued that the brand needed more variation to meet changing tastes. Instead of a calm, steady plan, the internal debates created a storm of conflicting priorities. Inside those walls, the tension was real. No one wanted to admit the scale of the problem, and no one wanted to be the one who moved too slowly. The conflict was not about whether the company would survive. It was about how and at what cost, and when competing visions collide at the top, the fallout always lands somewhere down the chain. The disagreements did not stay contained for long, and the next move sent a sharper signal than any memo or meeting recap could: the leadership shakeup that rattled confidence. When leadership changes hit a major company, the public usually hears a polished explanation about fresh direction or renewed focus. The truth behind those announcements is rarely so simple. In the middle of the year, a sudden executive shift inside the company caught investors off guard. A key figure who had helped shape recent strategy stepped aside, and although the official statement framed it as a routine transition, the timing told a different story. The pressure that had been building in private finally cracked through into the open. Investors began asking sharper questions once the news spread. They wanted to know whether the change reflected a planned evolution or a sudden internal rift. The company's statements used steady language, but the confidence behind them felt thinner than usual. When a leadership team stands on solid ground, their words carry an unmistakable weight. When they stand on shifting plans, the tone changes, even if the message does not. Dealers felt the unsettled mood. A sudden leadership shift signaled deeper issues, and sales managers who once pushed the 25 models with confidence now braced for changes. Riders noticed too. This was not a simple debate, it was a fracture with real consequences, opening the door to significant restructuring. And that restructuring came quickly, moving quietly through the company like a tightening belt. The quiet cuts Harley didn't want to acknowledge. The company did not announce sweeping cuts or dramatic shutdowns. Instead, the changes slipped in gradually, each one small enough to avoid major headlines, but significant enough to alter the internal rhythm. Staff reductions began first, targeted to departments where delays or slow sales made the workload lighter. These were framed as adjustments, but everyone knew the real purpose was to tighten the operation to match the shifting market. Production, once the pride of efficiency, slowed as well. Some lines were paused, and others saw reduced shifts. The move helped control costs, but it also signaled that the company did not expect demand to rebound quickly. Development followed the same pattern. Projects that once aimed for aggressive rollout dates were trimmed or stretched out, buying time and conserving resources. It was a controlled contraction, designed to preserve stability without admitting how far the decline had reached. In the background, consolidation became a quiet but steady theme. Support departments were merged, responsibilities were shifted, and the company tried to keep the changes out of public view. None of it looked dramatic on the surface. But for anyone paying attention, the pattern was obvious. When a company tightens from the inside, it does so because the pressure from the outside is too great to ignore. These cuts affected more than internal staffing. When development cycles slow, new ideas take longer to reach the road. Riders depend on regular improvements in comfort, handling, and reliability. And every delayed project pushes those improvements farther out. For a brand built on tradition and trust, that slowdown carried its own weight. And these internal shifts led to a final twist that caught both dealers and riders off guard. The strategic pivot that surprised dealers. After months of tightening operations and wrestling with declining results, the company settled on a new approach that redirected attention toward what it saw as its strongest foundation. The pivot centered on focusing the lineup more narrowly, emphasizing the core touring machines that had carried the brand across decades. While this focus seemed logical from a distance, the way it unfolded created confusion among the people who depended on clear direction the most. Dealers learned that some customization options would be reduced or reshaped, cutting down the variety that many loyal riders expected to choose from each year. Variants that once filled specific niches quietly vanished from early ordering lists, creating uncertainty about what the brand truly wanted to offer going forward. The company framed the decisions as part of a streamlined vision, but the shift felt abrupt for those who had been prepared to promote a broader lineup. The narrowed lineup did not match what riders valued. Choice and tradition built loyalty, and quietly retiring options created a gap between expectation and reality. The shift felt corporate, not road-tested, leaving dealers scrambling and riders adjusting. It was not a collapse, but it cracked trust with loyal supporters. And while this internal break reshaped the company from the inside, the real impact was still waiting outside the factory walls, where riders and dealerships would soon feel the weight most directly. The dealerships that went dark without warning. The downturn inside the company eventually pushed its way out onto the streets, and the first real signs appeared at local dealerships that had been fixtures in their towns for decades. When a shop that once buzzed with weekend riders quietly shut its doors, the impact rippled far beyond the loss of a retail space. Some closures happened with almost no warning, leaving riders stunned to find their regular stop suddenly dark, the windows covered, and the lot empty. Reduced hours became the new normal long before the shutdowns, signaling that foot traffic had faded and business was struggling to stay above water. Inventory followed the same fading pattern. Floors that once held a strong spread of touring machines, cruisers, and trade-ins began to look thin. Some dealerships kept only a small cluster of new models on display, while the rest of their space sat hollow. With trade-ins frozen in many regions, riders who wanted to swap their old bikes for newer models found themselves stuck. Dealers could not take on more used inventory when they were already struggling to move what they had. That freeze created a bottleneck that left owners holding onto machines they planned to replace, simply because the market no longer moved in a predictable rhythm. The closures did more than erode convenience. In many areas, riders now had to travel farther for repairs, parts, or test rides, adding miles to tasks that once took minutes. The dealership network had always been a backbone of long-distance riding culture, offering support far from home. When shops vanished, that sense of security faded with them. And as dealerships shut down or scaled back, the next blow hit the heart of every rider's routine, keeping a bike ready for the road. If you're still here, make sure you're subscribed and leave a comment. The next models on this list change fast, and the best values disappear before most anglers even know the prices moved. Staying subscribed means you never miss the deals worth acting on. The service slowdowns that hurt long-mileage riders. When the strain on the company reached its service departments, riders felt the consequences immediately. Parts that once arrived in a few days started taking weeks, and sometimes longer. The delays were not limited to obscure components. Common items like intake seals, belts, electronics modules, and brake parts began to sit in backorder queues. Each delay pushed repair timelines further out, forcing riders to cancel plans, postpone trips, or sit through entire stretches of riding season without access to their machines. Labor shortages compounded the problem. Skilled technicians were already in short supply, and the internal tightening across the company made it harder for dealerships to keep enough hands on deck. Service managers described days where a single tech juggled several jobs at once, causing even simple maintenance to drag on much longer than expected. Turnaround times stretched until riders felt as if their bikes had vanished into the back of the shop. The timing could not have been worse. As aging touring machines hit higher mileage, they needed more care, yet parts delays and labor shortages left many riders waiting instead of riding. Service struggles shrank more than schedules. They shrank freedom. Every day a bike sat on a lift felt like another piece of the season slipping away. With service slipping and new models piling up in showrooms, the next shift hit a part of the market that riders watch closely: the used segment. The used market twist that caught riders off guard. The sudden overflow of unsold 24 models and heavily discounted 23s created a twist in the used market that few riders expected. Prices that once held steady began to drop as dealerships quietly offered markdowns to clear the backlog. A nearly new touring bike that cost one amount in the fall suddenly cost far less by early spring. Riders watching the market saw values erode faster than at any point in recent memory. The drop did not happen evenly either. Certain trims fell sharply while others held their ground, creating a confusing landscape with no clear pattern. This uneven depreciation made buying or selling feel like a gamble. Riders who had planned to sell their machines discovered that their equity vanished almost overnight. Others who had been saving for a lightly used model found themselves in a strong position, since the discounts made some nearly new machines more affordable than expected. The contrast created an unusual tension. Some riders benefited, while others took significant losses without any warning. And while the numbers and markets told one story, something deeper began to fade. Something far more connected to identity than inventory. The culture that started to slip through Harley's fingers. The hardest hit of all came from the slow erosion of something riders hold above any spec sheet or sales chart: the culture that built the brand. For decades, the identity of the machines centered on freedom, long-distance pride, and a shared understanding that the open road belonged to anyone willing to ride it. But in 2025, A disconnect grew between what riders valued and what the company seemed to prioritize. Corporate messaging focused on streamlined offerings, while riders looked for authenticity, tradition, and that familiar long-haul soul. Many longtime riders felt the old touring character fading at the edges. The personality of the machines had always been part engineering and part spirit, carried by riders who lived thousands of miles in every season. When the brand's presentation drifted toward a more polished, less grounded tone, the community noticed. Some expressed frustration at events and meetups, talking about how the company's direction felt more like a boardroom projection and less like a reflection of real riding. And that road forward brings its own challenges, because the choices made after a year like this shape everything that comes next. How Harley plans to regain stability. The year that shook the company left it no choice but to rethink almost every corner of its operation. As 2026 approached, the brand began quietly outlining a plan meant to reshape the foundation it once took for granted. The first step involved refining production itself. Instead of pushing high volume without clear demand, the company prepared to tighten output so that supply better matched real-world interest. That shift alone signaled a more disciplined approach, one that acknowledged the pressure created by leftover machines from earlier years. By easing the pace and focusing on steady manufacturing, the brand hoped to stabilize the flow and avoid the buildup that had weighed down the entire network. Reinforcing core touring models became another priority. The long-haul machines have always been the backbone of the company's identity, and leadership understood that the riders who depend on those models still expect durability, comfort, and refinement. By redirecting engineering toward those strengths, the company aimed to reestablish trust with the riders who had carried the brand for decades. This renewed attention to the touring segment signaled a quiet return to what originally defined the company: machines built for distance, not just display. And while the company reshapes its internal plan, the changes coming to the dealer network reveal just how much the landscape will evolve next. The next phase for the dealer network. After enduring the bruising strain of 2025, dealerships began preparing for an entirely different rhythm in the years ahead. One of the earliest signs of this shift came from new service priorities. Instead of trying to push as many new models as possible, many dealerships started emphasizing long-term maintenance, dependable repair work, and rider support. That shift not only helped stabilize revenue, it rebuilt the trust that had wavered during the toughest months. The inventory approach also began to evolve. Instead of flooding showrooms with multiple versions of similar models, dealerships moved toward a streamlined spread. Fewer variations, clearer lineups, and more predictable stocking patterns gave both staff and riders a better sense of what to expect. That change reduced confusion and limited the risk of machines sitting untouched for months. Dealers no longer wanted a forest of unsold models. They wanted a curated selection that aligned with real demand. And while dealerships evolve in their own way, the financial world is watching closely to see whether the brand can regain enough stability to keep moving forward. Investors, risk, and the long road forward. When a company enters a period of uncertainty, investors become more cautious, and that caution shapes everything that follows. The shifts in 2025 left many financial observers hesitant. They wanted proof that the company could sustain operations, manage its costs, and maintain the loyalty of its long-distance riders. Investor caution did not translate to abandonment, but it did mean the brand was under the kind of scrutiny it had not faced in years. Every quarter, every statement, and every initiative will be measured carefully. The long-term risk extends beyond financial charts. When a legacy brand enters a rebuilding phase, the risk touches identity as much as revenue. If the company fails to redefine itself with purpose, it could drift into a space where relevance becomes harder to defend. Riders might still love the machines, but the broader market may judge the company based on forward momentum rather than heritage alone. That is the challenge the company must now anticipate. balancing respect for tradition with the need to evolve. And through all these shifts, corporate, financial, and dealership-wide, there is one final truth that riders themselves must carry with them. The real lesson riders should take from 2025. The year delivered a tough reminder that the motorcycle market moves in cycles, and those cycles rarely match the pace riders expect. The real lesson is patience. When prices surge, when models stack up on lots, and when the direction of the brand feels unclear, waiting often becomes the smartest move a rider can make. Patience protects a wallet better than any dealership incentive, and 2025 proved it. Understanding the differences between model years has also become more important than ever. Slight changes can affect value, reliability, and long-term cost of ownership. Riders who study those differences gain an advantage that no marketing message can match. That knowledge shapes smart buying strategies, whether choosing a well-maintained older machine, timing a purchase during a market dip, or avoiding a model year that lacks substantial improvements. Rider culture outlasts every corporate cycle. No matter how the brand shifts, the community stays steady. Traditions built across generations remain stronger than any misstep from above. Machines endure because riders give them purpose. The road endures because riders keep moving. 2025 belongs to them, not the boardroom. That wraps up the real breakdown of Harley's turbulent 2025, not the corporate version, but the one riders lived through. If this helped clear things up, let me know what you experienced out on the road. Did your dealer have leftover models? Did prices push you away from upgrading? Your stories help other riders make smart choices. So drop a comment, hit the like button, and subscribe if you want more straight talk videos with no sugarcoating.